To bring you on the arrest of hip-hop music mogul Sean Diddy Combs, who was arrested at a New York hotel last night by federal agents.
Late afternoon in a Manhattan federal courtroom, Sean Diddy Combs, hip-hop legend, mogul, accused criminal, sits motionless at the defense table. No entourage, no flashing cameras, just the cold weight of the law pressing down. Behind him, his mother clutches a tissue. Across the room, alleged victims glare in silence. But it's Cassie's voice that pierces through the tension. Calm, controlled, devastating. She doesn't just accuse him. She paints the picture, the tunnels, the masks, the bruises, the threats. And that one night, she thought she wouldn't survive. "I knew if I screamed, no one would hear me," Cassie tells the jury. Because in his world, no one ever did. This isn't gossip. This isn't tabloid fuel. It's testimony under oath. But as Cassie finishes, the defense attorney smirks, holding a folder labeled evidence. What's inside could destroy her credibility. The list of charges against Sean Combs is as sprawling as his career. Prosecutors have indicted the 55-year-old rap mogul on 5 felony counts, including racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. In simple terms, the government alleges that Combs used his vast music, media, and lifestyle empire as a criminal enterprise to harm women and fulfill his sexual desires. This is a RICO case, the kind usually reserved for organized crime bosses, painting Combs as the mastermind of a long-running scheme of abuse, violence, and sexual exploitation. If convicted, he faces life in prison, unless the defense's secret witness, a name even prosecutors haven't heard, takes the stand tomorrow. On the other side, Combs vehemently denies all wrongdoing. He has pleaded not guilty to every charge, and his defense doesn't dispute that he can be, in their own words, a jerk with a bad temper in volatile relationships. But they insist that his actions, however flawed, do not add up to a criminal conspiracy. They claim the prosecution is exaggerating a toxic relationship into something out of a mafia movie. It's a dramatic clash of narratives. Was Sean Combs simply a troubled, impulsive man who indulged in consensual debauchery, or a calculated predator who weaponized his wealth and fame to entrap and control? To prove their case, prosecutors are leaning on testimony from those who know Combs best, the people who lived inside his glamorous yet allegedly abusive world. And at the center stands one woman, the star witness, whose shocking story ignited this entire case. Cassandra Ventura, known as Cassie, walks to the stand, visibly pregnant, and locks eyes with her former lover, Sean Combs, for the first time in 6 years. She recounts a harrowing decade-long relationship with him, marked by cycles of charm and terror. At 19, Cassie was swept into Combs' world, first as his protege, then as his girlfriend. She testifies that the relationship was dominated by fear and violence, describing numerous beatings and constant surveillance. Cassie recalls a specific incident where Combs beat her so badly in Las Vegas that a security guard cried upon seeing her injuries. In 2016, a viral video showed Combs dragging her down a hotel corridor, an incident Cassie was too terrified to report. She reveals the abuse extended to forced participation in freak-offs, drug-fueled sex parties with male prostitutes, which Combs orchestrated and recorded. Cassie explains she felt trapped. Then the defense plays a video. The date stamp matches one of those nights, and Cassie doesn't look like a victim. She testifies that Combs' control over her was so absolute that she feared for her safety and lived in constant dread. In 2018, after years of abuse, Cassie finally tried to break free, but alleges that Combs raped her during a final closure dinner. The emotional toll from the abuse led to depression and PTSD. But with support from her husband, Cassie filed a civil lawsuit in 2023, accusing Combs of rape and trafficking. Combs settled the lawsuit within 24 hours for $20 million, which Cassie rejected as hush money, stating she would return the money if it meant never reliving the trauma. On the stand, Cassie breaks down as she recounts how Combs manipulated her, and she tells the jury that her fight is not about money, but principle. She explains she is testifying now because she can't carry the burden anymore, hoping that her courage will help expose the truth of what happened behind closed doors. Cassie's testimony sets the tone for the trial, but it's clear that her story is just the beginning as the prosecution prepares to call more witnesses. Dawn Richard, a former member of Diddy's groups Danity Kane and Diddy Dirty Money, steps onto the stand to share her harrowing account of witnessing the abuse Cassie Ventura endured at the hands of Sean Combs. Dawn's career was closely tied to Combs, and she had a front-row seat to his violent behavior. She recalls a particularly shocking incident in 2009, when Combs became enraged over Cassie not cooking his eggs quickly enough. He allegedly threw a frying pan at her, narrowly missing, then shoved her against a wall and dragged her by the arm and hair up the stairs. Dawn recounts the chilling screams she heard as Combs remained eerily calm. This violent episode marked the beginning of a pattern of abuse that would continue over the years. Dawn describes another incident in 2010 at a concert in Central Park, where Combs punched Cassie in the face in front of bystanders. Cassie, reeling from the blow, tried to maintain composure. Dawn further testifies about a violent altercation in a West Hollywood restaurant in 2011, where Combs allegedly punched Cassie in the stomach and then escalated the abuse in a chauffeured van, slapping Cassie and ordering her to be silent. Throughout these moments, Dawn witnessed a culture of fear and silence, where no one intervened, underscoring Combs's control over his inner circle. Dawn admits that for years she remained silent, too fearful to speak out about what she had witnessed, knowing Combs's immense power in the music industry. Her silence was driven by the fear of retaliation, but after years of guilt, Dawn decided to testify. During cross-examination, the defense attempts to discredit her, questioning inconsistencies in her testimony and implying her motivations could be financially driven, especially considering her own lawsuit against Combs. Dawn rejects these insinuations, asserting that she came forward out of solidarity with Cassie and a sense of moral responsibility. While admitting her recollection of certain details may not be perfect, Dawn stands firm in her account of the violence she witnessed, naming several members of Combs's entourage who also saw the abuse, reinforcing the prosecution's claim that Combs's abusive behavior was an open secret among his inner circle. Dawn's testimony provides crucial corroboration to the case, showing how Combs's abuse extended beyond Cassie and was tolerated, if not enabled, by those around him. As the trial unfolds, it becomes increasingly clear that Sean Combs's alleged abuse was not limited to physical violence. It was a complex system of domination, fueled by drugs, weapons, and psychological manipulation. Testimonies from Cassie and others reveal an environment where Combs's word was law, and where those around him, including Cassie, were coerced into submission. Cassie opens up about how drugs were used to control her, admitting that throughout their relationship, she relied on substances, often supplied or encouraged by Combs, to numb herself from the emotional and physical abuse. Prescription opioids, ecstasy, cocaine, and alcohol were rampant in their lives, especially during the so-called freak-offs, multi-day drug-fueled sex parties orchestrated by Combs, where she was forced to participate. These parties, Cassie reveals, became a full-time job for her, where her compliance was dictated by drugs and manipulation. Combs, she testifies, would often insist she partake in these sessions, not just to control her, but to fuel his own desires. The control didn't stop with drugs. Cassie describes how Combs used threats of violence and actual weapons to maintain his grip over her. She recalls multiple instances where Combs brandished a gun, such as a time when he waved one in the air during an argument, sending a silent message that he was untouchable. One particularly chilling moment involved a threat he made when Cassie attempted to date rapper Kid Cudi in 2012. Combs allegedly vowed to have Cudi's car blown up, and weeks later, the car mysteriously exploded. Cassie's testimony makes it clear that Combs's access to weapons and his volatile temper made him a dangerous prospect. Beyond physical violence, Combs wielded other forms of control, including financial dependence. Cassie was financially reliant on him, living in an apartment paid for by Combs with no income outside of what he provided. He controlled her career, her movements, and her sense of security. If she strayed, he would flood her phone with calls, or even have bodyguards track her down, ensuring she never truly escaped his influence. Perhaps the most terrifying form of control was surveillance and blackmail. Combs allegedly kept a collection of explicit videos, recordings of the freak-offs, and used them as leverage over Cassie. He would remind her that he could release these videos at any time, making her feel completely owned. This constant threat of exposure was a sword hanging over her head, ensuring her compliance and silence. The prosecution argues that Combs built a system of total control over Cassie, where drugs kept her compliant, violence kept her fearful, financial dependence kept her trapped, and the threat of blackmail kept her isolated and silent. The empire he created, they contend, was one where he was an untouchable ruler, and the laws of society did not apply to him. As the trial continues, it becomes clear that Combs' abuse was a calculated and deliberate strategy, one that escalated as his power grew and his ego expanded. As the trial intensifies, the defense aggressively targets Cassie Ventura, the central figure in the prosecution's case, aiming to discredit her testimony. Lead attorney Anna Estevao adopts a calm, conversational tone as she presents intimate text messages between Cassie and Combs, including ones where Cassie expresses eagerness to participate in freak-offs, sexual encounters orchestrated by Combs. Estevao implies that these texts suggest consent, attempting to undermine Cassie's claims of abuse. Cassie, visibly uncomfortable, explains that she said these things to keep Combs happy, emphasizing that her words were driven by fear, not desire. Estevao presses on, citing a 2017 text where Cassie again mentions loving the freak-offs, but Cassie insists that by this point, she was living in constant fear and was brainwashed into normalizing the abuse. Her testimony underscores that her compliance was a survival mechanism, not genuine consent. The defense pivots to question Cassie's motives, suggesting financial gain as the real reason behind her accusations. Estevao highlights Cassie's financial struggles after leaving Combs, insinuating that she had a financial incentive to file the lawsuit. Cassie firmly rejects this, stating that money is not her focus, and even offers to return the $20 million settlement if it meant erasing the trauma she endured. Estevao then tries to discredit Cassie by bringing up personal jealousy between her and Combs' longtime partner, Kim Porter, suggesting that their relationship was simply filled with typical relationship issues, jealousy, cheating, and misunderstandings. Estevao portrays Cassie as someone potentially rewriting the past out of bitterness. Despite this, Cassie remains steadfast, reaffirming that she was controlled and abused, not engaging in kink or mutual consent. As the defense continues their cross-examinations, they target other key witnesses like Dawn Richard and Carrie Morgan. With Dawn, attorney Nicole Westmoreland tries to undermine her credibility, pointing out inconsistencies in her testimony and suggesting that her memory may be unreliable after 15 years. Dawn stands firm, insisting that she clearly remembers the assaults she witnessed. The defense also hints that Dawn only came forward after Cassie did, suggesting she may be influenced by Cassie's courage rather than offering a genuine account. Dawn dismisses these accusations, emphasizing solidarity with Cassie. Carrie Morgan's testimony is similarly scrutinized by Mark Agnifilo, who questions her perspective on the love she witnessed between Cassie and Combs, suggesting that their relationship was not entirely abusive. Morgan reluctantly admits there were moments of love, but stresses that Combs' control over Cassie was undeniable. The defense's tactics create doubt, but the prosecution remains determined, planning to call more witnesses to solidify their case as the trial continues. Carrie Morgan takes the stand, a longtime friend of Cassie Ventura for 17 years, and her testimony paints a complex picture of love, loyalty, and devastating betrayal. Morgan, composed and measured in her tone, recounts her front-row seat to the turbulent relationship between Cassie and Sean Combs. She confirms much of what Cassie has testified about, Combs' suffocating control over Cassie's life, including the financial stranglehold he maintained over her career. Morgan reveals how she repeatedly urged Cassie to leave Combs, but Cassie felt trapped, explaining that she couldn't walk away because Combs managed her career and finances. This dependency, Morgan stresses, was key to Combs' power over Cassie, making escape feel impossible. But Morgan's account takes a darker turn as she describes witnessing Combs physically assaulting Cassie on at least 2 occasions. One violent incident, following a party, involved Combs choking Cassie to the point where she nearly passed out. Morgan intervened, but Combs turned on her with a menacing stare, making it clear that anyone who stood up to him was in danger. The situation escalated in 2018 when Combs showed up unexpectedly at Cassie's home in a drunken rage. Morgan recounts how Combs struck her with a wooden hanger after a confrontation, knocking her unconscious and leaving her with a concussion. The betrayal continued shortly after when Cassie approached Morgan with a non-disclosure agreement and $30,000 in hush money from Combs to silence her about the incident. Morgan, still shaken by the events, agreed to take the money, but the action shattered her trust in Cassie. Their friendship ended when Morgan felt betrayed by her best friend's decision to cover up Combs' violent behavior. Morgan admits that despite her own trauma, she understands why Cassie did it: fear, shame, and Combs' overwhelming influence. But it remains a painful memory. On the stand, Morgan acknowledges the complexity of Cassie's relationship with Combs, admitting that despite the abuse, there was genuine love between them. She recalls moments of joy, Cassie's excitement when Combs surprised her with gifts, or the fun they shared on trips. However, she also illustrates the emotional manipulation and control Combs had over Cassie, using the hammer incident and Cassie's subsequent protection of him as proof of his hold on her. Morgan's testimony, while humanizing the relationship, also solidifies the prosecution's argument about Combs' abuse of power. She confirms that Cassie's fear and dependency kept her from speaking out sooner, and that Combs' influence silenced her and others around him for years. As Morgan finishes her testimony, her quiet strength underscores the lasting emotional toll of witnessing her friend's suffering and her own betrayal. The jury watches, processing the emotional complexity of a friendship destroyed by one man's abuse of power, as Morgan steps down from the stand, visibly emotional but stoic in her resolve. David James steps up to the witness stand, dressed sharply in a suit and tie, looking every bit the professional he once aspired to be in Combs' world. In 2015, a bright-eyed 20-something, he answered a job listing for a personal assistant to Sean Diddy Combs, thinking it was a golden opportunity to break into the fashion industry. However, he quickly realized that his new role was far from glamorous. Reflecting on his first days at Bad Boy Entertainment, James recalls the head of HR's blunt remark about Combs' empire. "This is Mr. Combs' kingdom. We're all here to serve in it." At the time, James took it as a colorful figure of speech, but now he sees it as a forewarning of the strict hierarchy and the suffocating power Combs wielded over everyone around him. From day one, James testifies, the message was, "Sean Combs is the king. Your job is to obey." James describes his time working for Combs as exhilarating but exhausting. He was on call 24/7, catering to Combs' extravagant demands. While the details of Combs' hotel riders remain mostly private, James hints that they often included arrangements for private parties, specialized security, and potentially unsavory requests, tasks that he and other staff members were expected to facilitate without question. He emphasizes the strict "stay in your lane" mantra that he was repeatedly told by bodyguards and senior staff whenever he asked questions about anything unusual or concerning. If he noticed Cassie looking upset or questioned the sudden change in plans, he was reminded not to interfere with Combs' wishes. The atmosphere surrounding Combs, according to James, was one of intense control, where employees were expected to be silent, obedient, and complicit in maintaining the mogul's image and desires. He paints a picture of an entourage trained to avoid questions and never challenge Combs' authority. James's testimony also sheds light on the darker, morally ambiguous side of working for Combs. He recounts times when he had to arrange private jets, fetch late-night snacks, or even procure female companions for Combs' parties, which the prosecution ties to the so-called freak-offs. James's careful wording makes it clear that he was often asked to facilitate and cover up Combs' indulgences, whether it was canceling public appearances for Cassie when she had visible bruises or lying to the paparazzi to protect Combs' secrets. James likens the experience to being caught in a web of complicity, where everyone around Combs, from security to assistants, played a role in protecting him from scrutiny. He also describes how Combs' famous catchphrase, "Can't stop, won't stop," now takes on a darker meaning in light of the trial. What was once a catchy slogan becomes a chilling reflection of Combs' relentless pursuit of power and control. The prosecution's case gains strength through James's testimony, which ties together the patterns of fear and manipulation described by Cassie, Dawn, and Carrie, while highlighting the broader culture of silence and loyalty enforced by Combs' inner circle. In the final phase of the trial, the prosecution shifts focus, connecting every harrowing witness testimony and event to the central accusation that Sean "Diddy" Combs ran a criminal enterprise under the guise of his entertainment empire. They argue that under the RICO statute, Combs is not just an abuser, but a racketeer. They emphasize that Combs' actions, forced prostitution, violent assaults, sexual abuse, kidnapping, and sex trafficking, are not isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern of behavior. The prosecution points out that Combs used his businesses, staff, and resources as tools to facilitate his deviant demands, with employees instructed to stay in their lane and comply without question. They highlight testimonies from Cassie and David James, showing how Combs' employees were complicit in covering up his actions, orchestrating freak-offs, and ensuring that his will was executed. The prosecution also introduces the idea of a broader victim pool, noting the presence of other women, including a Jane from 2020, who have similar stories of abuse and manipulation. All of this, they argue, forms an unmistakable picture of an organized criminal enterprise. The prosecution then zooms out, asking the jury to consider the bigger picture. They highlight the numerous lawsuits filed against Combs and suggest that the sheer number of allegations points to a systemic pattern, not just coincidence. They argue that Combs' wealth and power allowed him to evade accountability for years. But now, the legal system is holding him accountable. They cite the $20 million settlement with Cassie, the $30,000 NDA with Carrie Morgan, and Combs' previous brushes with the law as evidence of his ability to silence those around him. Under the RICO statute, the prosecution weaves a story that goes beyond isolated incidents. Each act of abuse, each payment, each cover-up adds to a larger narrative of exploitation and control. He called himself the King, the prosecutor reminds the jury, and in his kingdom, he thought he was above the law. RICO is here to remind him, and everyone, that he is not. In contrast, the defense argues that the prosecution is overreaching, casting a troubled relationship as an organized criminal enterprise. They assert that Combs may have been flawed and impulsive, but argue that these personal failings do not constitute a criminal conspiracy. The defense concedes that Combs had a temper and struggled with addiction, but insists that the actions described in court are not those of a criminal mastermind. They attempt to humanize Combs, suggesting that many people, including Cassie, voluntarily stayed in the relationship due to the perks and lifestyle Combs provided, arguing that the case is about a relationship gone bad, not organized crime. Tini Geragos, one of Combs' attorneys, emphasizes that while Combs' actions may have been toxic or damaging, they do not rise to the level of criminality. As both sides rest their cases, one fact is clear. Sean Combs' legacy now hangs in the balance, with the jury tasked with determining whether the man once known as an iconic mogul is guilty of orchestrating a long-running scheme of exploitation and abuse. The trial of Sean "Diddy" Combs has revealed a darker side to the man once seen as the ultimate bad boy of entertainment. Behind the glitz and glamour, witnesses have peeled back the layers of an empire that thrived on control and fear. Cassie Ventura, Combs' former protege and girlfriend, has bravely shared the harrowing details of her decade-long relationship with him. Alongside her, former friends like Carrie Morgan and colleagues like Dawn Richard have testified, exposing the emotional and physical abuse they witnessed firsthand. David James, Combs' former assistant, provided rare insight into the operations of Combs' world, one that thrived on secrecy and manipulation. Together, these testimonies have painted a picture of a man who used his immense power to create a personal kingdom built on intimidation and exploitation, with no regard for the lives he shattered along the way. In court, Cassie's courage has stood out, even as the defense has tried to undermine her credibility. Cassie has acknowledged some of the complexities of her relationship with Combs, including the texts and actions that could be misconstrued as consent. But she has maintained that her compliance came from fear, not desire. In a powerful moment, she rejects the notion that her case is about celebrity sexual preferences, instead emphasizing that it's about coercion and abuse. Her emotional testimony, paired with her declaration that she would return the $20 million settlement if it meant she could regain her freedom, has struck a chord with the jury. Cassie is not here for compensation. She is here to seek justice for the years of trauma she endured. As the trial comes to a close, the world watches as the jury deliberates, waiting to see if Combs, once untouchable, will be held accountable for his actions. Fans who once idolized him, industry peers, and survivors of abuse alike await the verdict, which will reshape how Combs is viewed. No matter the outcome, the trial has already altered the legacy of Sean Combs. His empire, once synonymous with success and power, now carries the weight of these allegations. This trial has exposed a hidden world of abuse and control, forcing even the most powerful figures to face the consequences of their actions. With the gavel poised to drop, the world waits to see whether justice will be served or whether the untouchable will remain unscathed.